Good morning and welcome to another video cast from Hendy Consulting, the specialist management consulting firm to the $125 billion FPD display market. And today we'd like to take on an important announcement out of Korea that the Ministry of Trade and Industry is planning to support the display players around $49 billion of capex over the next 5 years from the top two Koreans into maintaining the position of Korea in the display industry and further enhancing it. And I want to talk about whether or not we think that's enough and how much of a difference that will make, but also then this notion that I've heard some people talk about at some time, which is, the whole market's going to go OLED at some point. Well, I think not. So anyway, let's talk about those themes and talk about this story from Korea. So if we talk about the top 6 players in the industry, they're actually in 2022 about 80% of the 120 billion roughly display revenue in 22. If you look at the 2 players from each of the countries at the top of the leadership board, then SDC and LGD are actually 39% of total revenue. BOE and China Star are 28%, and the 2 Taiwanese twins are 13% of total. But actually, if you add additional players below the top 6, quite a few actually are Chinese, and so you end up adding an additional 6+% on revenue, and so China starts getting within kicking distance of the Koreans, and really on a capacity basis, clearly China's ahead, and Korea is only maintaining its position through its revenue mix. So then, to reinforce that idea, this is my leadership, my sort of innovation ladder for the display industry. The lowest level here is players who can simply buy equipment, some engineering, probably a technology license. You can get into standard amorphous silicon, and there are quite a number of players playing at that level, including HKC as a major Chinese player, but with large amounts of capacity, but still probably at the first rung of the ladder. Ladder rungs 2 and 3 are actually now standard and flex OLED, which is really interesting. That wouldn't have been the case maybe 10 years ago, but it's got to the point now where pretty much if you've got some sort of technology partnership and or hiring lots of engineers from other firms, then you can have a go at doing glass OLED or flex OLED, or you can work for a decade and begin to get there. And certainly players like Visionox have begun to show that, but you can actually work very hard at this technology, buy the equipment and begin to make some real progress in OLED. It's then really the top rungs are left for players really capable at oxide and low temp polyoxide, and then the top 2 Koreans, who I would argue really are the only ones able to fundamentally deliver new ecosystems to the display industry, complete new ecosystems. So both SDC has done it repeatedly and LGD has done it with white OLED, and I think really the industry leadership board does have those at the top. So then we turn to this story which was reported on Display Daily, which was the Korean Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy wanting to push Korea back up the leadership board with displays, and then a secondary claim here that up to 49 billion more of capex is going to happen in the next 5 years. Yes, it is 49, and that's going to help support the position of Korea in the industry. So let's talk about whether or not that's credible and how much of a difference it will make. Well, if you back this out separately, and you can talk about, well, how much does spending 49 billion on capacity equate to? So we could take flex OLED fabs, which are actually quite intense. You get 1 million square meters of capacity for about your $3.6 billion in cash, and then depending on what we think the price of flex OLED displays are today, you might get $1.5 billion to $2 billion in revenue out per year right now, based on a 70% load. So you could say each dollar of capex translates to about 50 cents of revenue right now, and clearly that's going to decline. So it's quite a intensive technology from a capex basis. If you did that again on white OLED or QD OLED, you actually get even less per dollar of capex roughly, because the pricing per square meter of QD OLED or white OLED is so substantially lower, so you'd get even less revenue back per billion spent there. And for now, my feeling is the new Gen 6 8.6 fabs are going to be very expensive, but the pricing of the product initially might be quite decent. So again, around this benchmark level, and it was really interesting when I was doing LCD factory analyses earlier in my career, it was always that you wanted to get to peak revenue on a factory of at least 1 and preferably 1.3, 1.4 times the capital spent. But you can see with OLED that by the time you've got established markets, actually that conversion rate is lower than that. OLED is simply an expensive technology to put into the market. And we'll get to then, well, what does that mean for 100% OLED cases? So then what happens then? Well, if they spend 49 billion, I think is the number, that's the correct number quoted in the story, that maybe is 25 billion of incremental revenue. Now, what will happen to the rest? I mean, to some degree, it will be whether the market will accept paying those raised prices for these new OLED products, but probably the rest will get crushed down to some degree. It will grow the market on total a little bit, but on that basis here, you could say Korea could be 70 billion, and that might give them actually half of the total market. Let's say if the market grew to 140, that might then put STC and LGD back really in a very strong revenue position by spending their way back to the top of the leadership board with a distinctive leadership position. It quotes in the story that they want to be at least 5 years ahead of on technology. Now on Flex OLED, I think you could probably claim that STC probably is 3 to 5 years ahead of BOE on Flex OLED. In QD OLED and White OLED, I think it's already clear that you can say the Koreans are ahead. But to maintain the 5-year gap will be really challenging when the Chinese are just that good. And so then if we then look at it, I mean, this is the story that many people do ask me about. It's like, well, isn't it then that the market will convert to OLED? And I always smile at that because you start going, well, what would it actually take to get to the whole market being OLED? And if you look roughly today, it's roughly 40 to 45 million square meters of OLED fabs at the moment, with a preponderance towards Flex OLEDs, of course, but I mean, there is some OLED television in there, but it's about 45 million square meters. Now that pales into insignificance compared to the LCD market. I mean, 390 million square meters there. It's a very, very large number. And so then really you start saying, well, OLED today is really still a drop in the ocean compared to the LCD capacity. So if you wanted to convert this, and let's say there's some oversupply, to 300 million square meters, right, of total capacity, all as OLED, what would that mean? And using some simple heuristics, you can basically say, well, that actually might be $300 to $600 billion more spending to get to that sort of level. So this 50 billion by Korea, while it sounds like a very, very big number, is actually still a drop in the ocean. It's enough to move the basis of competition. It's enough to give Korea maybe 50% of total industry revenue, but it's not enough to convert the market to OLED. I hope you found that interesting and provocative, and certainly it'll be fascinating to see just actually how much the Koreans do achieve. I wanted to talk a little bit about Henley Consulting as a business. I think most people in the display industry are aware of Omdia and DSCC and Yole for microLED research as market research companies. And they're great if you're asking questions like, how big is the market for smartphone OLED? Or what is the pricing today for a 55-inch LCD TV? Or even what factories are planned in the future for both OLED and LCD. Those are great repositories and actually cost-effective ways of getting that sort of information. Where Henley Consulting sits is as a management consulting provider, and so we ask sort of different level questions, I would say higher level questions, but questions like, is the technology that our company has any good? And how do we improve the competitive positioning? How do I set up a joint development agreement with the display industry so that it gets a fair amount of value and so that somebody might even pay me to move my technology forward? How should I think about planning a factory, and then what's the right sort of mix of new and old capacity or semi-finished product or collaboration with the display industry? And what are all the issues around fab planning if you're thinking about doing that either as a display player or as a supply chain player that's thinking of putting capacity into the market? And then the sort of meta question that we really often get asked, particularly by startups, is how do I take where I am and improve my position and chances of success in the display market? So I'm hoping to try and indicate how management consulting and what we do is different to the market research companies. So if you buy a report from a market research company, then you and 30 others are buying the same information set. If you work directly with a management consulting provider, except for the USA, we can pretty much come to you if you want. It's working with your team and it's solving a different range of business problems. But we have solved a huge range of problems across a huge range of parts of technology across the industry. So we are generalists, but also specialists in the display market and in solving that sort of business problem. And if you are fascinated by any of these insights and would like to talk to us about your technology and business, please drop us an email, a message through LinkedIn, just by hitting the message button and say, let's talk. And we'd love to do that. Thanks very much.